It's Women's History Month, and I want to come out the gate talking about Pauli Murray. She was a historical figure whose achievements span decades, but we don't hear enough about this person. I was first exposed to her when I was reading this book called Jane Crow. And as I was sitting up here reading this with her achievements in racial equity, trying to battle sexism within the civil rights movement, battling racism within the feminist movement, I'm like, why do we not talk about Pauli Murray? Well, we're going to end that today. I have my notes, and let's talk about Pauli Murray in her early life. So this is a young Pauli Murray. She was actually born Anna Pauli Murray, and she was born November 20th, 1910. She is a descendant, a direct descendant of a white male enslaver and a black enslaved woman. And basically, because of her lighter skin, she had to straddle the fence. And y'all know how colorism is. She was too dark to be a white person, to pass for a white person, which some of the people in her family could, but she was too light to fit in with the fully black people. So she faced discrimination early on. After a complicated childhood, she was actually sent to North Carolina, and her auntie, Pauline, is who raised her. Pauline was like an adopted second mother. In North Carolina, as I'm sure you can understand, since she was born in 1910, her family, as a black family, even though, yes, they were mixed with some white male descendants, um, they still faced poverty. So she had to battle colorism, she had to battle racism, and she had to battle poverty. But also, she probably would be what we call today queer, or we don't really know because it's not like that there were words for this, but this is how she dressed. And you also have to remember that back then gender was very strict. There were strict boxes for people to fit in. But she was still pretty gender fluid, a concept not recognized in her time. And she was literally a trailblazer because she pushed these norms. And her Aunt Pauline actually let her dress this way, except on Sundays when she had to wear a dress. She recognized that racial discrimination early on was not where she wanted to be. And so she was raised in North Carolina, but instead of going to school in Carolina, which was still very racially segregated, she decided that she was going to go to Columbia. She came across the roadblock in going to Columbia in that they didn't actually admit women. So this is part of where she decided that equality and being fair was what she was going to focus on. And since she couldn't go to Columbia, she tried to enter Hunter College, but coming from where she was coming from, she didn't have enough credits. So she actually had to move up to New York, do high school for another year before she would have enough credits to be accepted to go to Hunter College. So keep in mind, she is attempting to get an education before women and Black people could really fully go into schools without some kind of discrimination. So after she graduated from Hunter College, she decided that she was going to go to Howard University, Howard University being a Black college. But then she came up against the sexism from the men in at Howard University, her peers. They were actually sexist towards her. This demonstrated the attitudes and gender roles in the Black community. And so, despite Murray's role in advocating for civil rights, scholarship, learning, education, she still bumped heads with the men in Howard and actually in the civil rights movement. Y'all have to remember that leadership was dominated by men, and leadership in the Black community was also dominated by clergy men. And so, this woman who at every turn in her life kept coming up against people who wanted to treat her unfairly because of her race, because of her gender, because she was poor. She was always constant. This is how she got her roots in fighting for civil rights and women's rights. Murray and other women of that time faced massive barriers to representation in leadership, despite having the mental acumen and the education. Men still dominated in all levels, even within the Black community. I know the Black community likes to act like feminism wasn't important, but it really was, because we were sent to the proverbial back of the bus. And that is where she coined the term Jane Crow, because like Jim Crow basically segregated Black from white. Jane Crow segregated men from women and wanted to dominate women. So where we sit up and act like this didn't happen, people might not know it didn't happen. I mean, might not know it happened because we ignore these historical figures like Pauli Murray. So by the time that feminism was becoming a thing, Pauli Murray was all on board, and she connected with the NOW organization, the National Organization for Women, because she knew that women's rights were being trampled. The only issue, or the big issue with NOW, was their racism. So the NOW organization and many organizations that were feminist movements tended to be headed and led by white women. And white women wanted equality. They just wanted a little extra equality for themselves, not necessarily Black women and other women of color. The crazy thing is, Pauli Murray was actually one of the founding members of NOW, the National Organization for Women. She was using this organization to fight for gender equality and against systemic discrimination. She soon became disillusioned because the white women leaders would not address the racism within their ranks. And this is another aspect of intersectional feminism that wasn't a term, but that Black women faced. And Black women, yes, we knew that we had to come up against racism and sexism, and you can see it when you actually read up on these historical figures. So Pauli Murray also became a lawyer, and I have notes on this because she was integral in a decision that really changed history. In 1971, Murray made history with her argument based on the 14th constitutional amendment in her famous Reed versus Reed case. Her legal expertise and commitment to the course of civil rights inspired her to challenge gender discrimination under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Her argument would play an essential role in the Supreme Court's decision to strike down state laws that discriminated against Americans based on gender. She was integral with this strike down, but we don't hear about her. This is where she was using her argument about Jane Crow. And many women that followed her, even Supreme Court Justice Ruth Ginsburg, used the Jane Crow argument in order to help continue to strike down discrimination based on gender. A quote from Pauli Murray I want to pull out is, "When my brothers try to draw a circle to exclude me, I shall draw a larger circle to include them. Where they speak out for the privileges of a puny group, I shall shout for the rights of all mankind." Throughout the various things that she encountered in her life, she did seem to live her life by these words. When I tell y'all this, Polly Murray lived multiple lives within her lifetime. She also became an Episcopal priest. So she went from fighting for racial justice, trying to claw her way out of poverty. She was fighting against sexism. She's fighting against racism within the feminist movement. And she also was fighting discrimination in trying to become an Episcopal priest. This woman was phenomenal. Okay, my notes on her. Murray's groundbreaking journey would eventually take a spiritual turn in the later phases of her life. After an extensive life of activism, she chose to follow a different path and become a member of the Episcopal Church as a clergy member. In 1977, she was ordained the first Black woman priest, thus breaking another barricade and strengthening her advocacy and her legacy for social justice and equality. So, and also, Polly Murray tended to keep her private life very private. She probably would be considered a queer woman by standards today. She could have also been, using the terms they, them, if she were to choose pronouns today, but we didn't have the terms for that. She was a religious person, And she did live her life at times with dating women, but being raised in the church and feeling a strong pull towards religion, she didn't actually expound on that very much. Her legacy is long. She wrote tons of notes. When she did pass, she had so many notes that talked about the life that she led. She died in 1985 of cancer. Her legacy will live on, but we have got to talk about this phenomenal person, this historical figure, and all of her achievements. Like, comment, share.